Good morning, folks. This is Sayer G, founder of greenmedinfo.com. It's March 14th, and I've just finished an article that you can view on the home page here, which is entitled, Does Chemo and Radiation Actually Make Cancer More Malignant? And this is part of a series of looking at cancer from the perspective of it not being something that just happens to us, but something that the body does, i.e. it's an intelligent ancient survival program within our DNA that is unmasked due to environmental pressures such as low oxygen, excessive glucose or fructose exposure, pH being acidic, and exposure to environmental toxins, nutrient deficiencies. All of these conspire to activate a set of genes which may go back as far as 1 billion years ago, preceding the advent of highly specialized organs and highly differentiated cells, which make up the multicellular community of cells, which is my body and which is a human body. So cancer cells are not differentiated. They regress back to this previous cellular incarnation, and what I'm looking at here is a view of cancer where we're suddenly realizing that the chemo and the radiation may actually eliminate the cells within a tumor which are keeping the more malignant subtype cells in check. So you have something called cellular senescence, where certain cells stop replicating. They're not technically cancer, they're actually just aged cells, and they're kind of taking up space, and they do indirectly perhaps contribute to cancer by increasing oxidative stress and just acting sort of as a burden. Well, these cells in a tumor, which has a high degree of variability when it comes to the types of cells within that tumor, because it is a community, a little proto-community, those cells actually are, by their very existence, blocking out the malignant ones. Now, we see this reproduced exactly in the microflora in the gut, where you have certain potentially pathogenic bacteria or yeast. Let's take Candida albicans, which is considered to be highly problematic subsequent to antibiotic exposure or chemicals that deplete the good or friendly bacteria. What happens is that the yeast is relatively resistant to antibacterials, so it grows out of bounds and it starts to cause problems itself. Now, in normal circumstances, those yeast populations are within check and probably serve a beneficial function. At the least, what they do is, in theory, they crowd out a space that could be occupied by a more virulent strain of bacteria. So let's say you're eating your regular factory farm chicken. It has C. diff or salmonella. And owing to the fact that the mucosa is already being occupied by certain bacteria that, again, may not be good or bad, it's just neutral, that C. diff isn't going to have an opportunity to implant itself, get through the intestinal cell wall, and cause systemic damage. So the idea is that tumors are highly complex organizations of cells, and they do have their own inner logic, which contradicts entirely the mutational view of cancer, which has been the prevailing explanation for at least half a century, which is that it's just a byproduct of random mutations within the DNA code of the cell that by chance leads certain cells to go rogue, berserk. They stop acting in a civilized manner and suddenly have decided to take over the rest of the body by cloning themselves. Now, this view is not very helpful in explaining the facts, because tumors are, again, very highly organized communities. Paul Davies, who's the author of a new theory, which we've done a little analysis here on cancer being an ancient survival program unmasked, he proposes that these proto-assemblages are early communities of cells which existed preceding the advent of the sort of animal explosion, which I think Cambrian explosion occurred around 550 million years ago. Before that, there were these assemblages, and those cells obeyed behaviors that are very similar to what modern day tumors express, such as the ability to produce their own blood supply, the ability to secrete corrosive enzymes to get through certain tissues, the ability to cloak their community by changing the signatures of proteins or carbohydrates coming off the cell wall so the immune system can attack. And again, here's one of the more interesting ones: is if you're in a very primitive environment a billion years ago, and you didn't yet have the advent of plants who produce all that great oxygen, so their atmospheric oxygen is non-existent. How do you live? Well, you use anaerobic processes like glycolysis to produce energy. And so what happens with cancer is, it's known as the Warburg effect, is that the cancer cells don't require oxygen to thrive. And so, or you have the other very fascinating fact that cancer cells don't undergo programmed cell death or apoptosis. Instead, they are relatively immortalized. They don't seem to die. Well, that property of not dying, not giving your body or your cell up to the larger whole of the multicellular community, is a hallmark characteristic of the type of organism that would have thrived a billion years ago. I mean, certainly having the ability to die wouldn't perpetuate your genome and help you get to where we are today. So apoptosis, or programmed cell death, is actually a later overlay genetically on top of the default state of the cell, which is hyperproliferation. So it's a fascinating topic. Well, either way, here's the article. If you go here, and we go into discussion of this process and really the colossal failure of chemotherapy and radiation. Now, it's not just that there's all this collateral damage. I mean, we know that fastly replicated cells, they undergo mitosis, their DNA is exposed, and therefore, in theory, chemoradiation is able to destroy those cells above other non-cancerous cells. The problem is there are a number of fastly replicating cells in the body. The intestinal cells, for example, undergo complete turnover every 2 days. You have hair follicle cells, you have immune cells, the bone marrow in particular, gets completely decimated by the relative non-selective cytotoxicity of these agents or processes. So what happens is that if you take a tumor with this heterogeneity, you have this variety of cell types. You have benign, you have some semi-benign ones, you have some highly malignant ones. Now they're all in this proto-community, they're working together, and they're growing slowly perhaps. And you take chemoradiation, you blast that community. What you're going to do is very similar with what happens with antibiotic resistance, is you're going to select out the cells which are basically relatively benign because they're not as resistant to the poisoning or the radiation. So you've just generated a community of cells that are now liberated to break out. They're highly resistant to chemo. They're expressing multi-drug resistant proteins. They're able to just efflux out those chemicals from the cell, whereas the lesser capable, technically healthier cells within that tumor, which could have remained benign for decades, are dead. They weren't resistant. And so you've just created the equivalent of a antibiotic resistant or a superbug, only we're talking about cancer here. So we have super cancer cells. And so what happens is, okay, let's say you're being exposed to some type of highly toxic energy or substance, and your neighbors are dropping like flies, right? What are you going to do? You're going to get the heck out of there. So what happens is that you see an initial regression in the tumor size because you're killing all these cells that just are not resistant, and then you see the resistance emerge when that subpopulation of cells is able to actually thrive within the conditions created by chemoradiation, and they go break off and try to find a location that perhaps isn't going to continually blast them with these substances or these radiation rays. So the idea is that you've just metamorphosized, transmogrified a potentially relatively inherently benign lesion or tumor or cell population into a much less diverse, much less capable of the checks and balances associated with a normal tumor, into a rogue, berserk subpopulation of cells that just go anywhere. So that's kind of the new concept, and it's not really theory, because as you go through the article, you'll see all of this is hyperlinked. So when we're talking about tamoxifen, which is classified by the World Health Organization and the American Cancer Society as a human carcinogen due to its endometrial cancer-causing effects, we're not talking about theory. We're talking about peer-reviewed medical literature. So you click the link to go to tamoxifen on our website, and you'll see peer-reviewed medical literature, 29 different diseases. In fact, actually, I'm going to log in here so you can see through a quick summary everything immediately. This is our little login here, Sproutlet. And you can see in our quick summary box all the studies condensed right here. So you're seeing 15 studies on endometrial cancer being caused or contributed to by tamoxifen, but the list goes on. Memory disorders, fatty liver, potentially gastric cancer, cataract, bladder cancer, potentially cervical cancer, liver cancer, vaginal cancer. This is a side effect of the still first-line treatment for certain cancers, including breast cancer. It's absolutely terrible. So tamoxifen resistance is an emerging phenomena, and unless we change the paradigm, it will collapse. It's just a matter of time. You can't use highly toxic patented chemicals to treat poisoning. Okay, you don't use poisons to treat poisoning, but that's basically the paradigm within which we are presently stuck. So we go on through the chapter here, through the article. You'll see discussion of radiotherapy and how some of the research indicates that technically radiation will cause an induction of proliferation in the self-renewing capacity of breast cancer initiating cells. So what that means is that there are these stem cells within cancer tumors which are actually there continually regenerating and feeding the populations of the tumor cells. So they are technically, however, slower replicating and more resistant to chemo and radiation. So when you use radiation chemo, it actually drives the dominance of that type of cell in that tumor. So again, you may see visibly a regression in the size. However, the very malignancy, the very morbidity and mortality causing properties of that cancer are now amplified. And this is the really sad thing about what's going on with radiotherapy, medical radiation, in terms of diagnostic radiation. I mean, the BRCA1 and 2 gene, breast cancer associated gene 1 and 2, actually confer greater susceptibility to radiation-induced breast cancer than those who don't have it. So when they talk about you having a genetic propensity towards developing breast cancer, those who have this specific gene, right, this smoking gun, should be screened before undergoing diagnostic radiation. And certainly if they're going to undergo radiotherapy, which is still standard of care if you're diagnosed with a suspicious lesion like ductal carcinoma in situ, which arguably is not even a true cancer. In most cases, or in a good portion of those cases, it would be benign if left alone. That is actually now leading to people being treated aggressively with lumpectomy plus radiation, then chemo, follow-up. This is the standard of care. But that process is actually potentially causing greater harm than good. And the research itself, I'd like to point this out to you. This is not my opinion. I'm not a medical doctor. I can give you no medical advice, nor do I wish to. I simply want to disseminate the research that is already available on the topic. So this page here, when you click the link, brings you to X-ray mammography. And these are the studies that we've gathered indicating that far from the projected image of it being a form of prevention, okay, early detection being equated with prevention, exposing the breast to over 100 times the radiation associated with a chest X-ray at a wavelength that is technically far more carcinogenic than the high-dose radiation released in an atomic blast, okay, the low-dose radiation being far more carcinogenic. This is what they're giving women as a solution or as a preventive approach, given that it is actually one of the #1 causes of cancer. Well, you don't need to listen to me. I encourage you to click the links and do the research yourself and come up with a decision for yourself. Okay, we'll go down. So here's the thing, is we're looking at solutions as well. We don't just want to bring up the terrible fact that, yes, in some cases, radiation and chemo is actually killing people. Okay, and quickly here, if you look at the standard of care for pancreatic cancer and you click this study, you'll see that the conventional treatment regimens, they compare with each other, because of course they'll never compare a chemo protocol to the use of turmeric, or even just sitting there consuming fruits and vegetables. It would be very interesting to see what would happen. But the 1-year survival time let's see, this is actually showing that technically pancreatic cancer treatment results in a survival time of 4.9 months for this combination, 6.2 months for that combination, 5.7 for that combination. I mean, it's atrocious. But what do? Okay, we blame the patient and say, listen, they had an extremely aggressive form. There's nothing else we could have done. I'm sorry. You blame the victim, quite frankly. You don't admit that the chemo, the radiation may very well have caused the enhancement of the malignancy. Okay, so here's the case for turmeric. We have a huge database on this topic. Of course, those who already know GMI-info know that we've looked at practically all the studies in existence off of the National Library of Medicine, have indexed them for you. So if you click the link, you can see these studies are available for you to view in their entirety as study abstracts. There's a video explaining it, and here are the subtypes of compounds within turmeric. You have the 586 diseases that have been indexed in association with turmeric. And you have research on, for example, 42 studies on research indicating it could be valuable in drug-resistant cancers. That's extremely compelling to me. And so we need to bring this substance onto the table, acknowledge why it will never become an FDA-approved drug. No one has the $800 million needed to obtain your average drug approval. It's never going to happen. But does that mean that the research here isn't relevant? Is it actionable? That's a choice that any patient should be able to make with their healthcare practitioners' say so and knowledge. This is something that should be done as a team, integratively. And here's research that we're talking about regarding the chemosensitizing, and what that means, it's basically helping the chemotherapy work better. So if you're going to go the route of treating cancer with conventional agents, at least use substances which are able to enhance the efficacy and protect the cells that should not be harmed by the chemo. That's all that we're saying here, is use the research. It is compelling at this point. It is just animal, it is just in vitro, because there is a impenetrable wall, which is the inability to capitalize non-patented natural substances. There'll never be a way beyond that, as long as we require FDA drug approval in order to allow the use of natural substances. Okay, that's the reason why you can't use them. You can't get the money to fund the research. There is a way potentially where people gather together, kind of Kickstarter. Let's all just donate $10 and maybe we'll have the $1 billion needed to prove something that may be absolutely obvious already. Do I want to be involved in that? No, not necessarily. I'd rather people wake up, use the research at their disposal. If it's compelling, if it's safe, it's affordable, it's accessible, then why not use it? And I commend physicians out there and oncologists who are willing to do what is right and to use the research that exists to improve the quality and the duration of their patients' lives. So here's the other sections on the topic. Now, we have a whole section dedicated to chemopreventive substances. This is our pharmacological actions index. There's about, I think, 500 of them. This gets into all the substances that have that demonstrated property. Chemosensitizers, again, highly compelling. Okay, because a lot of these substances are curcumin, which is from turmeric, resveratrol you find in peanuts, you find them in grapes. Genistein is in coffee, it's in red clover, it's in fermented soy. Even caffeine, good lord. Sulforaphane, which is in cruciferous vegetables. Broccoli sprouts, one of the best possible things that could be incorporated based on the research. EGCG, a polyphenol in green tea. Keep in mind, you can click any of these nodes and you'll see all the research on that specific substance. Now, EGCG has actually been used clinically to treat cancer. So it's one of the few substances that there's actually research on, like prostate cancer. But keep in mind, we are a living, breathing database of references here. So every page you go to, you can continue to click. Now, the actual abstracts, I should remind people, are below. So you can actually click any of these. You don't have to be logged in. You don't need to be a member. They all go back, click to the original citation on the National Library of Medicine. So you can get the full abstract here from the original source. I'll show you. This is the National Library of Medicine. But here's one thing I wanted to do, which was to show you that we have a function that you can use, again, without even logging in, called Substance Finder by Pharmacological Actions. So if you click that, and let's say we have cancer, and we're going to be treated by radiation. Let's take radiosensitizing substances. These are substances that increase the cytotoxicity or the cancer-killing effects of radiation, and let's take radioprotective. Okay, as a member, you can put up to 10 in simultaneously, but let's just take 2. You click this, and you get a list of those substances which have both those properties simultaneously. Okay, so let's go down. Bam. So 35 studies connecting curcumin with having both a radioprotective and radiosensitizing effect. Highly compelling to me right here. Okay, because if I was going through radiation and I knew I could take a teaspoon of turmeric and about 7% of that's curcumin, I don't really care so much if it's a megadose. I mean, there are people who'll take curcumin, bind it with the phosphatidylcholine, or put black pepper in. Excellent idea. You can take turmeric, cook it in ghee. That would help pull the fat-soluble components out. Add a little black pepper in. Traditional curry would probably have profound synergies. So you can use foods as medicine, absolutely. That's the whole point that Hippocrates was trying to make at the advent of Western medicine, right? Vitamin E, that's a very compelling substance. You have silymarin. And again, don't listen to me. You can just click the download button. Again, as a member, you get free GMI tokens to use, more than is worth a membership, in fact. And you can click OK to open up the document. And this is a very powerful peace agreement info that, unfortunately, I don't think people realize even exists yet, because it was designed really more for the doctor, the clinician, the healthcare practitioner, and really for the patient that honors, respects, needs the peer-reviewed medical literature. So this PDF is yours to keep, obviously, when you use it, and to share. And it has a list, here, of all the most compelling substances based on the 2 specifications. Curcumin, again, vitamin E, blah, blah, blah. You go down, and here's the actual research to support. So when you click the link, okay, the summary, you will see that it actually opens up to the original citation on the National Library of Medicine. Okay, so this document doesn't even go back to our website. We could care less if people visit our site to use the information. We just want to get it out there. And honestly, if a physician sees this, they're going to feel more compelled by, references going to the National Library of Medicine than back to our site. Well, let's say you want to add additional things in because you are also undergoing chemo. Okay, and let's say you have neutropenia because your first round of chemo hurt your bone marrow, and you want something as well. Now again, this isn't for self-treatment. How do you do this? Okay, this is for people to get information that is going to be actionable to them. Okay, actually I realized in this case I'd probably want immunomodulatory, because this is pharmacological actions. Let's see, immunomodulatory. Let's say I want to stimulate my immune system. Immunostimulatory. Let me see. There it is. Okay, let's see. I have a lot of inflammation. So we're just trying to pick out universal themes. This is not to be used to treat disease. Okay, this is not diagnose yourself and treat your disease using agreement info. We're not doing that. We're just providing you the information that is on our database. The studies themselves are being given a voice. So we go down, and all of those specified pharmacological actions are now referenced to every study in our database. So obviously here curcumin comes up again, very compelling. Resveratrol second, and this is how you can use the database. Again, the most important one probably is just the substance finder by disease. So here if you type in, let's say breast cancer, and let's say you have diabetes, okay, So, and you can go on and put all those in. You click this to submit. It's doing the crunching, going through technically every study in our database to find the information that's really individualized, and then down below there's the results. Okay, and again, the studies themselves are available to view through clicking the download button. So anyway, I hope that's been helpful. I appreciate any feedback you have. You can email Sayer, Sayer, J-I, at greenmedinfo.com. And I'm hoping that we are living up to our mission to educate, empower, and enlighten. Thank you.